is known for certain about Spartacus's early life, but historians agree that he was born in Thrace, a wild and dangerous region in northern Greece inhabited by warlike tribes. Its people were known for their ferocity in battle and unwavering resilience. Thrace was a land of horsemen and warriors skilled in hand-to-hand combat. From a young age, Spartacus likely learned to use weapons, ride horses, and survive in a hostile environment. Some accounts suggest that Spartacus may have served as a soldier in the Roman army before being enslaved. How did he go from being a free soldier to a slave? There are two theories here. The first is that it was through betrayal and capture. Some believe that Spartacus was captured in a battle against Rome and sold into slavery. The Romans, skilled at subduing peoples and turning their enemies into slaves, may have caught him on one of their many military campaigns in the region of Thrace. Another theory suggests that he himself deserted the Roman army, which at the time was punishable by enslavement. Rome had strict laws against desertion, and punishments were brutal, from execution to being sold into slavery to serve as an example to other soldiers. Whatever the truth, Spartacus ended up chained and sold to a cruel fate. The Gladiator school in Capua, one of the most brutal in the entire Roman Empire. There, his life would change forever. Being a gladiator was not a privilege, it was a death sentence. At Lentulus Badiatus's gladiator school, Spartacus was subjected to an inhuman training regime. From sunrise to sunset, he trained with heavy wooden weapons, learning the combat tactics that could mean the difference between life and death in the arena. The Roman system turned gladiators into killing machines. Each was assigned a fighting style based on their background or physical characteristics. Spartacus, being a Thracian, was probably trained as a Thraex, a type of gladiator who used a short, curved sword called a sika and a small shield. Thraex were renowned for their speed and aggression in combat, a deadly combination that could unbalance better armed but slower gladiators. Life at gladiator school was not just physical training, it was also a game of survival. Slaves were mistreated by trainers and subjected to brutal punishments if they showed disobedience. Food was scarce and of poor quality, designed to keep gladiators fit, but not to provide them with much comfort. In addition, gladiators not only trained, they also had to endure constant humiliation from their masters and spectators, who viewed them as mere playthings for the show. Injuries were common and did not always receive adequate care. Many gladiators died not in the arena, but from infections and diseases arising from poorly treated wounds. Despite this, some gladiators' lives were extended longer than expected, especially if they demonstrated skill and charisma to the public. Despite everything, Spartacus was not only strong, he was smart. It didn't take long for him to realize that he and the other slaves were nothing more than fodder for the Romans' entertainment. Every fight was a desperate fight for survival, and over time, he began to wonder, what if instead of fighting for Rome, we fought against Rome? The first time Spartacus stepped foot in the arena, he probably felt the roar of the crowd, the scorching sun on his skin, and the latent fear that this could be his last day alive. The arena was not just a show, it was a bloody spectacle where gladiators were sacrificed for the pleasure of the audience. But Spartacus was not willing to die so easily. His combat prowess, agility, and strategy made him one of the most feared gladiators. Each time he survived, the crowd cheered him louder and louder. But in his heart, he didn't want glory. He wanted freedom. Rome had turned violence into a mass spectacle. In every match, gladiators were forced to fight to the death, regardless of their desires or humanity. Emperors and senators attended the games as part of their festivities, and the crowds demanded more blood with each fight. Yet gladiators were also admired, and in some cases could achieve fame similar to that of modern athletes. But behind the glory and applause, his life was still that of a slave. As the months passed, Spartacus began to form bonds with other gladiators, men who, like him, dreamed of breaking their chains. In the shadows of the gladiator school, a dangerous idea began to brew, a mass breakout to challenge the power of Rome. The planning was dangerous. If they were discovered, they would be executed immediately, but the idea of freedom was stronger than fear. Spartacus and his companions observed the guards' patterns, the escape routes, and any weaknesses in the gladiator school's security. The perfect opportunity had not yet arrived, but the seed of rebellion had already been planted. What no one knew at the time was that this would not be a simple escape, but the beginning of one of the most legendary rebellions in history. Spartacus and his slave army would mark a turning point in Roman history, proving that even the world's greatest empire could be challenged by those who refused to live in chains. Spartacus and his companions had endured months of brutal training and deadly combat at Lentulus Badiatus's Gladiator school. But while their masters thought they were being molded into perfect assassins, they were forging something far more dangerous: the will to rebel. The idea of escape was no longer an impossible dream and became a meticulous plan. Spartacus knew that if they wanted to escape, they had to act smartly and quickly. They couldn't just run away aimlessly. They needed a plan and allies willing to risk everything. The conspiring gladiators began to meet in secret, observing every pattern of the guards, every moment of carelessness of their captors. Using bits of information from the slaves who worked inside the school, they learned about the weak points of security. One of the key elements was that the guards underestimated the gladiators. They saw them as beasts destined to kill each other in the arena, not as men capable of thinking and organizing. But Spartacus knew that a single mistake could doom them all. The escape had to be quick, precise, and brutal, and the opportunity presented itself at the most unexpected moment. One night, a group of gladiators managed to seize kitchen utensils and turn them into improvised weapons. Knives, skewers, any sharp object became an instrument of liberation. The signal was given when the guards, unsuspecting and distracted, were at the lowest point of vigilance. The attack was swift and merciless. The guards barely had time to react before they were overwhelmed by the fury of the gladiators. Spartacus and his men took advantage of the confusion to seize real weapons and force their way out of the compound. It was no silent escape. Chaos quickly spread through the gladiator school, with slaves and combatants joining the revolt. When they finally escaped, Spartacus and his men found a makeshift camp on Mount Vesuvius. Their fight was only just beginning, however. Rome could not allow a group of runaway slaves to challenge its power. The crackdown would be immediate and brutal. Rome's response was not long in coming. A small detachment of soldiers was sent to quell the revolt, confident that they could subdue a group of slaves with no formal military training. But Spartacus was no longer just a gladiator. He was a leader. On Mount Vesuvius, his group organized itself. Using their knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla tactics, they ambushed the Romans. In a masterstroke of strategy, the slaves descended in a surprise attack from cliffs and surrounded their enemies, achieving a crushing victory. News of the victory spread quickly, inspiring other slaves to join their cause. The revolt was no longer a simple act of resistance, but the beginning of a war. Spartacus, the slave-turned-leader, now had the challenge of leading his growing army against the most powerful empire in the world. The victory at Mount Vesuvius marked the beginning of something much bigger than Rome had expected. Spartacus and his followers, now thousands of freed slaves, began to organize themselves into a true army. What had started as a desperate revolt was transformed into a force with structure, discipline, and strategy. Spartacus not only allowed slaves and gladiators to join, but also peasants and shepherds who were fed up with Roman oppression. His army was not limited to brute force. They used guerrilla tactics, attacking Roman detachments, ambushing caravans, and looting arsenals. With each victory, more slaves joined the cause, and soon the movement became a real crisis for Rome. As the rebel army grew, so did their ambition. They sought not only to flee and hide, but to challenge the power of Rome directly. The entire Italian peninsula was shaken by the revolt. Rome could no longer ignore the problem. Initially, the Romans sent smaller forces, confident that the revolt would be quickly put down. But each contingent sent was defeated and humiliated in battle. Spartacus proved to be a born leader and strategist, able to adapt and exploit the weaknesses of his enemies. The Roman Senate, alarmed by the scale of the conflict, assigned more experienced generals to end the threat. Spartacus, rather than entrenching himself in a fixed position, continued to move his army across the peninsula, avoiding being cornered. He defeated the consuls sent against him and proved that his force was not a mere band of fugitives, but a true army on a war footing. However, with growth also came internal divisions. Some of his followers wanted to march directly to Rome, while Spartacus saw his best option as heading north, crossing the Alps and escaping Roman rule. Differences of opinion would create tensions within the rebel movement. Despite his successes, Spartacus's fortunes began to change. Rome finally understood the gravity of the situation and sent Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of its most ruthless generals, to end the revolt once and for all. Crassus, unlike his predecessors, did not underestimate Spartacus. Instead of seeking a quick victory, he used a strategy of attrition, blocking supply routes and forcing the rebels to constantly move. Spartacus attempted to lead his army south in hopes of crossing the sea to Sicily, but Rome would not allow his escape. While Spartacus searched for a way out, Rome prepared the final blow. The end of the rebellion was near, and the dream of freedom was on the verge of extinction. But before he fell, Spartacus would fight one last battle that would go down in history. The decisive battle took place in 71 BC in southern Italy. Crassus, with an army superior in numbers and resources, had managed to trap Spartacus and his men. Attempts to negotiate a retreat failed. For Spartacus, there was only one option left: fight to the end. The rebels, despite their inferiority, fought with desperate ferocity. Spartacus, according to the chronicles, tried to force his way through to Crassus, seeking a direct confrontation with the Roman general. However, he was surrounded and cut down in the heat of battle. The defeat was crushing. Thousands of slaves were slaughtered on the battlefield, and the captured survivors were crucified along the Appian Way as a macabre reminder of Rome's power. The revolt had come to an end, but Spartacus's legacy would live on forever as a symbol of resistance and the fight for freedom. Although Rome managed to put down the rebellion, it could not erase the memory of Spartacus. His story became a myth of rebellion, bravery, and struggle against oppression. For centuries, he has been remembered as a hero of the oppressed, a symbol of resistance against absolute power. Roman historians, although they considered him an enemy of the state, could not help but recognize his military genius and leadership. His story was recorded by authors such as Plutarch and Appian, who recounted his bravery and the magnitude of his revolt. Over time, Spartacus transcended history to become an inspiring figure. In modern times, his legacy has influenced revolutionary movements and struggles for social justice. From Karl Marx to the workers' movements of the 20th century, Spartacus's name has been invoked as a model of resistance. His story has been adapted into books, films, and series, immortalizing him as a gladiator who challenged an empire. Spartacus may have fallen in battle, but his fight was never forgotten. His myth lives on, reminding the world that even the greatest power can be challenged when the will of free men unites in a single cry of rebellion.